Everybody get a sheet? Everybody need a sheet? Let's open with prayer, and we can dig into the materials. Listening and spiritual conversations. We bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather together. We thank you for the week gone by and the week ahead, for the blessings you've given and the blessings yet in store. Lord, we ask for your blessing upon us now as we gather around your word and with one another. May your Holy Spirit, through the word, continue to work on our hearts and strengthen our faith. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Relational ministry, listening and spiritual conversations. In order to care for others according to their needs, Christians are quick to listen and slow to speak. Those quick to listen, slow to speak phrases come from James 1:19. The skill of listening can open doors for the gospel as much as the skill of telling. That's the direction we're headed today. The need to tell, this is kind of an interesting thing. The 19th century French clinician, and I think it's pronounced Laennec, used to say to his students, listen to your patient. He is giving you the diagnosis. Laennec was a good physician. He invented the stethoscope, which is all about listening. A couple feedback opportunities here. Describe either a negative or a positive experience you've had with a doctor whose bedside manners of listening or not to you made an impression and maybe made a difference in the quality of the care they were able to offer. Anybody want to share? No, don't name names, I guess I'd ask. If it's positive, yeah. If it's not positive, just talk more gentle terms. Anybody care to share? So.
I went to a doctor once and I wasn't feeling well. So he examined me, took blood tests, I went up for a result. I had heart failure, diabetes, everything. I said, doctor, listen to me, I'm just not feeling, but I am the doctor. So I said, okay. He said, you have diabetes, you have heart problem. He gave me medication for heart. He told me somebody will come with the machine for the diabetes. So I have a doctor friend of New York. I got it and I took it and wrote down what the reading was. So I called her. I said that the doctor told me I have diabetes. He said, you took the reading? I said, yes. He said, tell me what it is. I don't. She said, throw it out. She said, throw it out. It's just where it's supposed to be. Now I went back to you.
The failure to listen resulted in poor diagnosis, right? Yeah. Mark, you had one.
Well, I have a couple though, but yeah. I mean, I remember once going to a doctor after I wrecked my knee and had a big, huge hematoma on my knee, and I was treated like a piece of steak, you know? Slap, slap, move over, you know, suck the juice out. But I just saw a doctor this past Thursday who was the most thorough and human person, and he caught me off guard. He did, you know, it's usually a lecture from on high, you know, and this, what it says here about listen to your patients, you know, this guy actually did, and I was like, whoa, yeah, you're one for the books. It was really good.
It made a difference.
It did make a difference because in their willingness to listen, you have a more openness to answer. I think that's, you know, it's a conduit that's created with that.
Sure.
You know, so, you know, then he asked a few questions that I honestly didn't know. So, you know, he said, well, okay, you know, we'll get on to something else. So.
Yeah. Your feedback is an important part of figuring out what's wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a story? Roll.
I think one of the most effective doctors I had was one that had the same condition I did. Because that was the first doctor I'd ever been to that really related. You know, he said, I know exactly what you mean because I have it too.
Wow. Empathy.
Empathy, which would be very helpful if you've been there.
Yeah. Here.
Well, just recently, because a lot of times when I go to the doctor, they use big words because I'm supposed to know what they all are, and typically I would if it did involve me. But you know, when it's me. I'm like, okay, break it down, speak in English. And this last surgeon that I went to, he said, well, what all do you know about gallbladders? And I said, everything I Googled. And so he actually like sat down and like explained it like he was explaining it to a kindergartner. And it was so much easier to understand, and it was just, you know, the difference of him just explaining it to make sure I understood everything he was telling me.
You felt more at ease. Yeah.
Right.
And that has something to do with patient care, I think, right? That is, and I think well, you spend time with doctors all the time on the basis of your profession. So there is, you can tell the difference, I think, between those who have a genuine care for the patient, and not that those whose bedside manner lacks don't care for their work, but maybe don't necessarily connect their work with the fact that it's a real live living human being on the other side of that work. And there's more to it than just running the needle in and out, or the scalpel, or whatever that might be. There's a bundle of nerves involved with that, and working with that person as a person is important. Number 2, the Apostle James wrote, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Why do some, and I'm not picking on doctors here, this happened to be my one tack, and then we'll take this into our really our care for one another. But why do you think this happens? Why do some doctors feel the need to speak more than listen? What?
They're trying to move cattle.
Right.
Oh, you got my doctor.
I mean, if your goal is to move as many people through as quickly as possible, you're trying to disseminate information as fast as you can. And, you know, rather than listen to what someone's saying, they just tell you what they think you want to know.
That's where the business side of it comes out, perhaps? I thought you said something interesting, Peg.
Well, they've got a lot of education, and sometimes maybe that separates them. But on a more sympathetic note, they see the same thing over and over again. And maybe they have to separate themselves from the weeping and the frustration and the anger of the patients in order to keep their minds alert all day long.
And I think that's important. There may be a genuine, helpful reason for why there's a certain amount of a dispassionate look. It's not as emotionally involved as the patient. That's probably a good thing, because if everybody in the room were just as torn up, it'd be hard to operate from a doctor's standpoint. Yeah. Diane?
I think my experience goes back to the last question with the good experience with the doctor. In a city that I used to live in, he was an internist, so he treated everything. And when I would go in to him, he would say, "What's going on?" He would always ask me that question, "What's going on?" And I'd look at him like, "Oh, I really get to speak here." You know? And he would listen. He would just position himself and he'd listen. And then he'd say, "Well, that sounds like a reasonable request." And I would always breathe, you know. And then he would disappear, and then he'd appear a couple hours later and give me whatever I needed. But I had to move away from that now, and I hated it just because the doctor was so good.
You missed that care.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else with why, thank you for that, with why the doctors feel need more to speak than to listen, perhaps?
Pastor, I'm really not sure of why, but when I donated my kidney
Yeah.
to Jason, when I first went and it was in USC, the doctor acted like, and they do it day in and day out, they know it, and I think they take it for granted that other people should just kind of know what they know. And I've never donated a kidney before, and so I was like, I want to know. And he actually got really upset at all the questions I asked him, and I, made him draw on my body where he was going to cut me because I wanted to know. And I wanted to know, the effects on the second kidney, and this, that, and the other. And I remember looking at him and apologizing and saying, "I'm so sorry for wasting your time. I'm really nervous. It's a major surgery." And I remember when I walked out the door, I looked at Donnie and I was like, "He's got a God complex," because he was just that rude. So when I went for my follow-up, he actually, I heard him in the hallway telling another doctor, "I sure hope that Jason's not as bad as Nicole," and that's all been questioned. And it really put a bad taste in my mouth, that doctor. And I'm like, what did I do but ask questions? Because I wanted to know, you're cutting into my body and you're taking a piece of me away. And I want to know where, how you're going to do it. Are you going to do something to my kidney before you take it to him? Or are you going to just hand it off? I mean, what are you going to do? I want to know. But, I think it is with them people, that's all they do. They do it day in and day out. And they want you to just trust them. And I'm sorry, but I just don't trust them. I want to know that, just because you have a degree, how do I know you didn't cheat on the board, I mean, that's the way
That's good. Let's hold on.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah. The God complex, you use that term, and that's one that you sometimes hear, which is what? When people come to you, they expect answers. And if you're the one with answers, then who should be the one speaking? Right? And if that's a legitimate understanding, then who's the one with the knowledge? The one with the degree. And who's the one with the experience? The one who's been doing this for a while. And so in that kind of situation, if that's what it takes to provide medical care, then who's the one who should be doing the majority of the talking? If that's legitimate. Hold on to that thought as we kind of work our way through this lesson, not about doctors, but about just in our care for one another in a spiritual way. In the meantime, though, look at number 3. Think of some biblical examples where situations could have improved if only someone had taken some time to listen, or think of some biblical examples where people did listen in a caring way and it helped. Anything come to mind where if somebody would have listened a little better, it might have been different, or because they listened, it improved the situation? Expand on that.
Well, if they would have listened to what Christ was saying, he wouldn't have had to get crucified anyway.
One way or another, it was part of the big picture plan. But you're talking about his enemies now, right? With regard to their animosity toward him, if they had listened to what he was really saying and believed what he was really saying, they wouldn't have had that kind of anger and that vehemence against him. Sure. He was after their salvation too. Sue.
I was thinking of helping in a good way when Joseph's brothers came to him and was explaining to him their situation. This is when he was head of Egypt.
Yeah.
And that went well. He listened to them and certainly helped that situation.
Yeah. Interesting in terms of, not only in terms of keeping them alive, but also in terms of reconciling the relationship, right? Because in the end, it all turned out fabulously well, in spite of the egregious event that had taken place years earlier. Yeah, absolutely. The reconciliation of Joseph and his brothers, bringing the whole family down to Egypt, in spite of the famine that was going on. That family survives. Obviously, God has a hand in that one because that's the family through whom the Savior is going to come. But he works through human instruments, and he certainly did in the case of Joseph. Yeah. Judy.
I was thinking of Pharaoh. I mean, I don't think he really understood the true power that God really had. And it took more than a couple of times. Moses, I go here because you're not listening to me.
Yeah.
And that stubbornness, his listening became stubbornness.
A hardness of heart, actually, is what Scripture uses. Where it's kind of like words. I picture in my mind, it's like we use that phrase, right? Talking to a brick wall. Boom, and it just hits and bounces off, And that was what it was like for Moses talking to Pharaoh. It was like talking to a brick wall. He didn't want to hear it, and he wouldn't hear it. In fact, even after the firstborn in each of the households was killed, though he let them go for a time, he quickly relapsed and wanted to bring back. This is why I sent the cavalry to get him. Marty.
Was Moses also one who God asked him, said, I'm not really a good speaker, and God said, well, what teach brother, to help you out. So God was listening and kind of came up with answers to the objections, support.
That's a pretty awesome case too, by the way. When God was calling Moses to serve as the leader for the people, keep in mind now some of the backstory. He had fled off to a foreign country because he had killed an Egyptian, and people knew, so he was guilty of murder. Now the idea of him walking back into the country where he may well have had his face up on a wanted poster, I mean, he doesn't know, he's been away 40 years. But faces the possibility that he may end up in the Pharaoh's dungeon rather than the Pharaoh's palace. And of course, the request that's going to be made is not one that would endear him to the Pharaoh, but one that would make him an enemy. There's a literal line in the sand there. That Moses comes up with excuses, and that God doesn't just bring down the hammer and say, shut up and get going. I can't speak well. Well, I'll give you Aaron. Well, what if they ask who sent me? Say that I am sent you, which is God's name, the forever being. I am, constantly in the present, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. There's never been a time that he isn't. And then it finally reached the point where I just don't want to. And then God said, well, tough. Because it's about the fact that I'm calling you to do this, so now it's time to get up and start acting. But that's an amazing one. Amazing to me, we used the term God complex before, because the idea behind God complex is that's how God works with human beings, but it's not. Isn't that interesting? The way the God of the Bible works is the God who truly listens. This Bible study isn't about prayer, but isn't that the whole point of prayer too? Why does God invite our prayers? Because He's listening. And it's not a fake kind of. I mean, He's genuinely interested in hearing from us. Not that He doesn't know it already. That's not to call into question His sovereignty or His omniscience, His power and His knowing of all things. But that He loves to hear from us because He loves to listen to us. And He loves to answer us in the way that He knows best. I think it's kind of a neat reminder of the true character of God, of who He really is. The value of listening. One bank boasts on a billboard, ironically, our tellers are great listeners. What idea are they trying to promote in order to attract customers with that tagline? They can help. And if they're going to help, the only way they really can is by listening. They got to know your situation. Not every product, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of world, right? We all have different unique needs and situations, and therefore the answers to those situations or the unique contours of what's going to fit that situation are going to be different for each person, potentially, and therefore the need to listen. Ephesians says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what's helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. My question here, a fourfold area. How is listening related to these four things? Wholesome conversation, helpful response, unselfish interest, building others up. Wholesome conversation. How is listening related to wholesome conversation? Okay.
Any fool can criticize, but it takes a lot of work to listen for the positive in other people's conversation.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if everybody heard it. Any fool can criticize, but it takes work, effort to listen for the positives and maybe the strengths in what another person is saying, or the value of what another person has to say. Is that what you get at? Sure. Other pieces of this.
Closely related to that is in that conversation, even if you totally disagree with the individual, there may be something there that provides you a link. I think of the talk before was it Peter that spoke to people and said, I recognize you have an altar to the unknown God. I want to talk to you about those Paul. Yep. The idea being he was looking for the link that would allow him to make a connection.
Yeah.
If you don't listen or look, in his case, you don't have that.
And he was probably doing both, actually. To see the groups, Roland is referencing when Paul was in the city of Athens, and he's walking around the city, and the city had altars to many different gods. In fact, they even had a catch-all to the unknown God. And it's kind of a study, it's a study in communication, but I think it's also a study in listening or hearing what people are thinking and saying. Even if they didn't say it with spoken words, they certainly said it with written words. To an unknown God, what game are they playing there? Yeah. Cover my CYA, right? No matter what, we're going to make sure we're okay. Whatever divine being might be out there, we're going to make sure we're okay. And to do that, even if we don't know his or her or its name, we'll kind of hit it with that generic. Just in case we missed you, it wasn't because we weren't thinking about you. We just really appreciate what you've been doing, and we appreciate how shy you've been about identifying yourself to us, but we wanted to make sure you got the praise due. I mean, that's kind of what that's saying, isn't it? And he could have taken many approaches. He could have come in with a hammer and smashed it. What kind of idiots worship a God that is unknown? You know, right? Seriously? This is where you're at with all the knowledge that your culture supposedly has, and this is the doofus response that you got with regard to divine beings? That's the best you can do? But he comes in with a very, I'm hearing what you say, you're looking for who he is, because you're clearly not confident in all the ones you think you've identified. Let me tell you who he is. Brilliant. Brilliant. Any others? Wholesome conversation. Mike.
I've been sent to attend a class a long time ago on listening, and one of the problems with listening is that most individuals have a very low percentage of interpretation of what they're hearing back in a conversation. And even if they think that they're in a listening in the conversation, they start jumping ahead what they think the other individual is saying without actually interpreting, paying attention to what's being said. And just as a little side thing, as far as some other classes, sometimes we're sitting in a lecture class. I recall a conversation going through my head a few times that I'm not paying one bit of attention to what my instructor is saying in front of me. And how do you get yourself back into a mode to actually listen to what's going on, and so you can go ahead and glean something out of the subject matter? So listening is not something that you just sit there without saying anything. It's a real skill to go ahead and develop.
It takes work. And I think people think of listening as a very passive activity. I'm not really doing anything, I'm just kind of there receiving. And that's kind of true, but you pointed out a couple flaws in just that. If you're not actively engaging with what's being said, or actively engaging with the not only the words, but also the unspoken part of it, how or what's being communicated, in what way, what's the context. If you're not actively engaging and trying to process what does this mean, you're probably not really, I mean, you may be hearing, but you're not listening. The other thing that you struck a nerve with me, the Diet Mountain Dew that I drink sometimes gets the better of me. That's an excuse, by the way. But this is a character flaw. Jesse hates it when I do this. She'll be saying something, I'll say, oh, I know what you mean, blah, 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 and I fill in the sentence for it. That's not at all what I meant. Oh, I thought it was. I clearly, but that's not what I meant at all. And it's like an impatient, it's like listening almost at times can drive you so, you want to get to the end result. What's the bottom line? Help me get there. And I want to get there quicker. You're not going fast enough. That the impression you leave is you're wasting my time. If you could just get to the point. Because I'm tired of listening. That is a skill. I like the term active listening. That you're engaging with. I mean, that it matters. It means something. And trying to figure it out, trying to process it. That is a skill. Wholesome conversation is built on that idea of both giving and receiving, and it has to be done actively. Otherwise, the essential result is no different than talking to a brick wall. So.
I feel when you listen to each other, it helps you to communicate better. In other words, you understand each other, what you're trying to say.
Yeah. I read this kind of interesting story. I think it was fictitious, although I don't know that for sure. But the author was making the point about how that very point, understanding one another. This was between two businesses, and they were fighting over oranges. And there was a limited supply of oranges, and each one of the oranges, so they could do they could perform their business function. I don't remember what the business function was anymore. But he was called in. He was a negotiator, so he was called in. And his job was to help bring these companies together, limited supply. They both had some sort of right to them, to find an amicable resolution to the situation because they were at each other's throats. Well, he said, after I spent some time listening, what I found out was one company wanted the inside of the orange and the other wanted the peel. Well, guess what? Both their needs could be satisfied. but they were at each other's heads or at each other's throats because for the longest time, when each heard orange, they heard the whole thing, even though all they wanted, although what each wanted was only a part of it. By truly understanding where each was coming from, they could actually satisfy both their needs. I thought that was an interesting
They
story.
were listening, they would just peel the orange, give the one who wants his skin, the one who wants it inside.
And that's what they did.
That's right.
And they both walked away happy. How many times in life does stuff like that present itself, and we don't necessarily always recognize it? How could we until we get a chance to work it through? Not only telling what we need, but also listening to what the other needs. How about helpful response? Maybe I made the transition there. Helpful response. What does good listening have to do with helpful response?
You can't give a good, helpful response if you haven't heard what they're saying.
Could be, theoretically, it could be totally off base, right?
Like you.
For example. Not pointing any fingers or anything.
There's a hook there, though. Guys have a terrible tendency to think that when someone brings up a problem, they want you to be commenting on what the solution is. And I don't know how many times what June really wanted me to do was to listen to her. And I'm trying to provide a solution that she wasn't seeking. She wanted to talk.
That is.
I wasn't listening really.
You were listening with guy ears, or a guy's mind. I do think this is something I talk about in pre-marriage a good bit too. Is sometimes when we, particularly in a married couple, as we talk, there are, maybe it goes to the orange story a little bit. There are different things that we're looking to get out of those conversations. If we don't understand that going in, we might end up at very different places, and it's important to understand that. Otherwise, you can have a hard time working through some of this thing. Marty.
We have family up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and Peg had said, "You need to go call your aunt." And my response is, "I'm not sure what I could do." And she goes, "Call her anyway." So I called her, and usually she's a 5 minute, 5 minutes on the phone, and 30 minutes later, she was thanking me for having called her. And I really didn't get to say a whole lot in that telephone conversation. It was just the effects of the hurricane and what was going on and things like that. And just to be able to, talk to somebody, I guess talk to somebody different who maybe hasn't heard the story like the neighbors were living it.
There's a different outlet.
Right, and that apparently gave comfort.
Yeah.
It is comforting to talk to you. They want to talk to you. Call them often.
Moving on. What about unselfish interests? Unselfish interests. What does listening have to do with unselfish interests? West.
If you're truly listening, you're listening with unselfish ears. So you're actually listening to what the person has to say as opposed to what you want to tell them. And that's a hard skill to master.
I've seen studies on this. Most people, when they listen, you know what they're doing as they're listening?
Getting ready to throw the next zinger out.
Yeah, what's my response to this going to be? Which is not really about listening. It's more about self-defense or self-assertion than it is about hearing what the other person has to say. I think that's an interesting thing. What Mike was talking about, a skill that needs to be learned. It's almost like that's like a discipline, isn't it? That I don't think you have to teach many people the idea of you really need to respond to it. It's kind of something that comes to us naturally, but the idea of just taking it in, letting it soak and saying, okay, that's a little harder to come by. There's a discipline to it.
I did Lincoln Douglas debate in high school and college.
Yeah.
And I was trained myself to listen to their conversation so that I could then bring up my next point to rebut what their point was. And sometimes I had to think 3 or 4 moves past them on how to get to the next point that I wanted to get and how I could push their conversation to get there.
Yeah.
And in a way that was actually very selfish listening, but at the same time I can use that skill now when I listen to people's conversations, and I can think about, okay, well, this is probably where they're going to go, but if I really listen to them, I can take their thought and then understand what they're really meaning, because I was able to, in Lincoln Douglas, to take that to take that thought that they were using, and I could help them figure out the next step to get to where I think they should be going.
Excellent.
And it's a hard skill to learn. It took me years of lots of practice.
Yeah. Well, and I think you identified something also there. The motivation behind it is a huge piece to it too. That the skill is not only the technical ability to help steer a conversation, but the why.
Right.
What's the goal? And the kind of listening we're talking about is really getting down to that why level, I think. Why is it that we want to process? Why is it that we want to figure out what's going on in the other person's life? So we can offer a rebuttal, or so we can offer a helpful response, or just to share in the moment. I mean, I think that's what you're talking about, Roland, right? I can see how that's frustrating. I can see how that's a cause of concern, those kinds of things. Jude.
In pastoral counseling, though, is part of the desire maybe the speed to reach the cure, or the solution, to relieve the pain to whatever they're talking to you about?
Yeah, I think.
Part of the process, just the venting and helpful just for them to articulate what it is. Even though you may know ahead of time where it's going, you deliberately delay maybe your response?
Well, I think I'll say you're touching on something that as you're talking about doctors, pastors can do the exact same thing. Yeah. and I can see some of those same, at times, when I'm in a rush, this is where it tends to happen. When you got a lot to do that day, and you feel like you're under a lot of pressure to get some things done, and there's deadlines looming, and then there's somebody who comes with a problem, and it's a problem you've heard before, and you've got a menu of options, and you'd like to get to those menu of options and help explore, but it's probably not so much out of concern. This is where I think the challenge comes in. It's not so much out of concern for helping them get there as it is to help move that project on so they get back to these other ones. I'm not saying that's high and holy. That's just I know it's a tempting reality that is part of balancing, and that's a time management issue of sorts too. But there's a temptation there. I hope it's not a cattle car situation, but but maybe at times, maybe one of the things that I'm personally taking to heart out of this study is the importance of the phrase that the author used was, be efficient with projects, be effective with people. Be efficient with projects, be effective with people. And there's a difference. Effective allows for the unpacking of the hurt, or the anger, the frustration, whatever that might be, then allowing room and space to bring in some ideas for potential, whether that's a redirection of actions or thoughts or reconciliation, whatever that might be, whatever the problem is, or finding comfort. That isn't bottled. Take 10 of these and call me 10 days from now or something like that. If it were, it would have been done already. that'd be my thought on that. It's something that involves, it requires human interaction, quality human interaction, and finding that balance. I feel like a novice at it, to be quite honest. Finding that balance. Because then I think, programs, when you talk about church, ultimately programs are also about people. And so how much of that distinction is really the things we do, is it about getting a task finished, or is it really about a task that has an impact on a person or on people? When I read my sermon, I said, well, that's a task, but it's not just a task, that's a conversation with 150 people. So do I need to be efficient there, or? My point is, they aren't always such clear-cut, clean boxes. But the temptations aren't just with doctors, and they're probably not just with pastors. I think this is a temptation when it comes to being relational. In a fast-paced, bottom-line driven kind of world, where, would you agree with me on this? The relational stuff is sometimes very hard to put a number on. And we tend to be numbers people, don't we? Americans tend to be numbers people. What's the quality of your relationship? Between 1 and 10, give me a number. With regard to what? The quality of our conversations, or the number of dates that we have in a month, or the prayer life. I mean, it's just too complex. It's too dynamic. There's just too much. How do you assign a single? And And so then sometimes I wonder if we kind of back off and say, well, it's too hard. There's so much to manage, there's so much to look after, there's so much to take care of. I can't wrap my mind around all of it. It's just hard to engage. It's easier to go after the stuff where I can. So tasks become very attractive. Then there's the flip side of it, I suppose, where the temptation is the tasks are daunting because there's so many of them. I'd rather just enjoy spending time with people, and I can use it as an excuse as to why I couldn't get my tasks done. I'm kind of drifting into a different area, but it all tends to mesh together. Sometimes in the classes, I hope you understand this, we try to pull things apart piece by piece, not because they exist individually, but because when we put it back together again, maybe it offers a little more wisdom or a little more insight into how we can go about things in maybe a little more effective and at times maybe an efficient way. That was a long answer to a short question.
And same with parenting and children too.
Sure.
If you have one child, another child, yeah.
It's very personal. I see my own kids, and I know many of you have made the comment to me, I can't believe these, I've got one, I've got another. One did this and had no problem, another had this, and struggles all the way. I promise you, they come from the same two parents. It's like, yeah, but they're not coming off of an assembly line. They are individual human souls whom God has blessed and gifted and different strengths and different weaknesses, and that's all part of His divine design. And I think there's a part of us in a highly efficient society. We want to find that way to kind of run them through, and get on with the next task. I wonder if people will look back on our day and age and say, those people were always in a hurry, but they weren't so sure about what they were in a hurry for. It's like, gotta go for what? I don't know, but I gotta go. I'm in a rush. And it's like, no sooner you get something done that you're on the go for something else. I'm speaking of myself now. And then we don't maybe we don't take the time, maybe we don't see the value, perhaps that's where it's at, we don't see the value in taking the time, investing that time in another human being, and the rich blessings that God intends to come from that. This thought, I found it in the time management thing that I thought was really cool. And I don't know if the guy was a Christian per se, but if he wasn't, he stumbled across this. He said, when it comes to relationships, if you didn't have time, you wouldn't have relationships. That the commodity you need to have a relationship is time. Without time, the use of time, if you don't have time, you can't have a relationship. You need that interaction, and the only way you get that is through the expenditure of time. Now we're kind of, duh, but I guess it never hit me quite that clearly before. And when you think about our lives as managers of God's gifts, one of those being our time, relationships are intricately linked to the management of that gift. Judy.
That's what I was going to say. We have mentors that come to the high school, and they're from they're out of USC, and they're Christian. And what they do is that they listen and they're taught that everybody's different. Some kids will go to the gym, but they're taking their time just to listen and to see what they can do to the kids. Sometimes they don't say anything, but these kids have so many issues, so many problems. Some of them go outside, but they're out of the environment, out of the classroom environment, and that tends to help a whole lot. And that's so unselfish.
Yeah. What can I do to help you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if they're willing and open to hear God's word, then they can say, but if not, then it's just keep it
Yeah.
straight.
There's a careful line there, I'm sure. And I wonder, at least I sense, and you can tell me I'm all wet with this one, but I sense the faster our culture becomes, the faster our lives become, the more valuable time invested in those types of conversations becomes. Just because it's so rare. I mean, it's a rarer and rarer commodity.
It could be life-saving in a lot of these situations.
Yeah.
In these cases.
It's just an and then connecting it back to ministry, if that's true, if that premise is true, think of the value of what we have to offer and the time we spend with one another. I mean, and it's time spent, the beauty of what we can do here is it's not just time with one another, it's time spent with God and with one another. Is there anything greater than that in terms of relational blessings? And I'd challenge you, not just you, I'd challenge anybody to help. If there is, let me know what those are. But I think that might get the pinnacle. And if that is, wow, what a blessing we have to offer to the world. And I've flown recently through Atlanta. Airports have a way of making, big airports have a way of making you feel like you're on a cattle car. I mean, everything is boom. If you leave your bags don't leave your bags unattended, or somebody might slip some. Boom. Please find your way to the escalator. Ride down escalator 2. Boom. Train coming in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Please step away from the door. I mean, you feel like, and everything is computerized. Everything is pleasant. You know, it's the elevator music. Boom. Prepare for stop. and the whole thing, you just feel. I mean. And nobody looks at each other. I don't know if you ever noticed this in an airport. It's just everybody's in a rush. Everybody's in a rush when you get to the airport. And particularly when you get to the bigger ones, you know, like go through Atlanta and everybody's connecting. And so the flight that got in late, and if you're on the what do they call it? The thing that goes out to meet the airplane, the skywalk. Is that it? If you walk too slowly on that thing, look out. It's like. And it's just amazing to me. And Atlanta in particular, just the volume of people that move through there on a daily basis. And yet, I wonder how many, and I'm guilty of this too, could I identify another person I ran across and not a chance? How much of life isn't built around that, you know, it's just large scale systems and just moving people here, there, everywhere. But I've heard this saying, you know, I'm in a crowd of people, but I feel all alone. And the bigger the world becomes, it's not for lack of people around, but it's for lack of, it's a lack of that connection. Willing to spend that time wanting to know and be known.
We have Facebook, but we don't have relationships with other people.
Yeah. There's a safe electronic space between us.
Firewall against other people.
One of the reasons I wanted to pick up this study is because I just see in what we're talking about here, one of the great blessings that as a Christian community, as a community of believers, that God has given to us and God has called us to share. And I think it's becoming more and more special because it's becoming more and more rare. I was listening to, who was I listening to? I was listening to somebody.
I hope so.
I was listening to what they had to say, not who they were. It was recorded. I've made my point of it. They're talking about we communicate more and more, but we understand one another less and less. He was commenting on those in the teenage years right now. For example, texting. He's a Christian counselor. He's never seen a generation communicate as much as this one does, the current generation. And yet, relationally, feels that he's never seen a generation as deficient in really truly understanding one another as he has in that generation. And he says a lot of it has to do with electronic communication. It's not, well, it's helpful. It's not true in-depth relation. It's not as personal. Yeah. It's void of what, or the proper interpretation of emotions. Sue.
That goes to, in addition to that, Emily and I took with a Christian counselor years ago when I guess she was like 14 or 15. And he said because so much of our communication is not just words, but it's your facial expressions, it's your body expressions, and they're not getting any of that with texting.
Mm-hmm. Emoticons don't quite fill the gap. Smiley face.
At the risk of being contrary, is it possible that we consider their forms of communication inferior to ours because we're no longer 14 through 20?
I think it's possible. I guess I took credence to what was being said. This is a gentleman who's not only studied it theoretically, but worked with those going through and understands the components of relationship. And he said, and I guess that was the assessment he was coming away with, and sort of added a little more credence to what I guess I've experienced myself. And I would say this even from my own in my own personal interactions, if it's something that's more than just functional, if there is emotion behind it, if there is something, especially a thing that's a cause of care or concern, it's best shared face to face, where we can interact over it in an immediate kind of way and really come to an understanding. And I think that was in that particular case, that was the point he was making. So yeah.
If all they did was text,
Then
I
you'd say,
completely and absolutely agree, but it seems like it's simply a craving to be more connected.
mm-hmm.
You know, our oldest went through the hurricane and he was completely, set up, everything was fine, but he said the 5 or 6 days without internet and without being, being cut off from everybody was rather terrifying. And he survived it, his wife survived it, but their neighbors spent every night in their apartment crying. Couldn't connect with anybody, didn't know how the rest of the world was doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's an evolution of communication.
It might be. Someone said that the modes that we use can also become an addiction. The conference I was just at served as chairman, and we had 185 people in the room. One of the things we asked was that they would spend that time unplugged. We gave them generous breaks, we gave them generous time away from the conference itself. So if they needed to check email, if they needed to check Facebook, if they needed to make phone calls, do that outside of the conference itself. Because I sat in many conferences, maybe you have too, where people are doing nothing but sending notes to whomever or playing mahjong but they're not really engaging in this connection. They got all these other things going on. And I honestly felt there were some who couldn't do it. I mean, I still saw them on their phones and they were doing their thing, and I'm like, there have actually been cases where the withdrawal is similar to that of a chemical addict, cocaine, alcohol. That it seems to fire some of the same centers in the brain. I think that is pretty amazing stuff. I'm a master of everything, not to be mastered by anything, Paul's words. Maybe we got to be careful about the modes of communication we use too. I can say this for myself. When we go away, and I am not conscious of this always, but I love that. I love being connected. I love checking what's in my inbox. I love checking voicemail. I love. Jess used to say that I check the mailbox before I kiss my kids. Unfortunately, she was right. But I came home. Working on that. I'm a recovering USPS addict. but there is part of that, and yet there's an artificiality to it too. That maybe the mode becomes almost the high rather than the connection itself. It's kind of. That might be a different thought, but interesting nonetheless. So.
It seems to me though that artificiality could be projected in a face-to-face conversation too.
You can. How you doing? Fine. How things going? Great. Oh, it's so good to see you today. My worst enemy.
Or maybe it's reversed to make yourself seem to be saying something and you actually say the opposite.
Sure. The mode isn't at fault there. Yeah, it's the people involved. Sure. So.
I think we are losing that human touch. We have 2 daughters, and I talked to one. I said, "Have you heard from your sister?" "Oh, I text her." I call the next one and we talk. "Do you hear her?" "Oh, she texts." I said, "You two don't talk?" I said, "Talk, not text, talk." They don't talk, they just text.
Yeah.
So they're losing that human touch,
Yeah, I see, and I think this is a challenge. I think that the avenues of communication are wonderful, wonderful things, and having many different avenues are wonderful. I think managing those in a way that's appropriate to what's being said and to the nourishment of that relationship is a challenging thing. What's the appropriate way? I'll give you a couple of thoughts of it. I love email for stuff that doesn't need to be addressed right away, but I can be thinking about and I can respond at the time that's convenient to me. A telephone seems to have a weird power over us. I don't know if you ever noticed this. I'll actually be sitting in conversations, and as soon as the phone rings, I was talking about this the other night. I said, as soon as the phone rings, it's like the whole room must go silent because, oh, it's the phone. and this isn't Bible truth, but this is Jay's on truth. Call waiting is kind of the most rude thing in the world. Somebody else is calling. I'm going to put you on hold. And if I'm hitting a nerve with that, I apologize. But my mom does that to me all the time. Somebody else is calling. Well, I'm enjoying talking to you too.
Off the phone is what somebody else says.
So different people have different uses for it. Maybe I just learned something about where mom goes, oh my God.
She's texting somebody.
We don't have to talk at all, just ring in. I need to hear the
We're actually going to try that once and see if that works.
I'm learning some things today. But they're different things that kind of cue us up, and I wonder if it's just a weird allegiance to the thing rather than to the person. That's the point I'm getting at, and kind of understand, give thanks for all the modes that God has given. I think it's amazing that we can communicate with people everywhere around the world. I do once a week, for example. I meet with my peer coach. He's down in Florida by Skype. Or I was meeting with Reinhold, and we were actually I was ministering to him via Skype, and there's an hour and a half, covering an hour and a half distance with the click of a button, and that's a face-to-face. What a neat tool. But then it's not the only one. I think it's neat that we have this menu of options, but also being sensitive to which ones are appropriate to what the situation, what the needs are at the moment. So, Jude.
On that note, as we mentioned, our Wells group has the counseling, that MAPS program. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in the country, you can get a Wells, again, has a scriptural background, that logical consistency there that you can get. And they have their counselors all, and they do all over with the computer, with Skype, or counseling by Skype.
We're actually exploring adding that as a way of avenue of ministry here in Lowell. So, yeah, member assistance program is what that stands for. All right, the skill of listening. I've got about 5 minutes with you. At a friendship witnessing seminar, participants discussed conversations where they'd be trying to witness about Jesus. They'd be responding on the fly to questions or false ideas. They'd be anticipating what needs to come next in the conversation and not listening. Their fear was that they'd be ashamed if they didn't speak appropriately or respond appropriately. We consider this, Proverbs 18:13, he who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. What exactly is the cause of shame? Not answering or not listening. How does that encourage your witnessing? Any thoughts on that? Mark.
How about not answering appropriately to the issue?
I can work with that.
Yeah. And it also shows the other person that you're really not listening.
Yeah. Julia.
It's almost like you're speaking before you get the full information. So sometimes it's to listen and then to stop before you start speaking and really gather the right information to bring forward, instead of just as soon as that person's done, being able to enter back into that conversation. Sometimes you need to have that wait time and let there be dead air. But we're too used to having that back and forth right away that we forget that dead air to formulate a good response to actually what was being said.
It's an interesting thing. I wonder how much, we live in such a noise-filled world, I wonder how much silence really scares us. And that might be part of it too. Wes?
A counselor I had a long time ago told me that the pill of solution is easier to accept with a glass of self-introspection. And what he meant by that was that a lot of times if someone gives you the solution to your question, then you're not going to do it. But if you come up with that answer yourself by someone leading you with the correct questions toward the answer that you should be coming up with, it's a lot easier to accept that answer than it is if someone just comes out and tells you.
That sounds like a good definition maybe for counseling.
Mm-hmm.
What counseling is all about.
And that's what listening's all about.
Sure.
To a point.
Yeah. To help direct, particularly if you know what God's will is, what God's desire is, to help, what you were saying before fits perfectly here, to direct towards, not with the cram it down your throat kind of methodology, but a directed guidance, helping lead in the right direction, but in the way of self-discovery. And there's a different feeling there, flavor that comes from that. And the best fill comes from self-introspection. You more easily swallow from self-introspection. Yeah, very good. Top of page 2. Questions are a powerful tool to prompt genuine listening, which results in better understanding, which allows more helpful caring. After 3 days, they found Jesus in the temple courts, this is when he was 12, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Or Paul went in the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you as the Christ, Acts 17. Reason here means discussed or dialogue. I'll give this to you as homework assignment because we're out of time. Make a list of at least 10 good questions or prompts we can use, or I can use, speaking to yourself, I can use to improve my listening and encourage others to open up and share. There's an art form to that. The difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions, you know the difference what I mean between open and closed questions?
Well, a closed question is something that can be answered with a yes or no or one word, and open is a probing question, why, how.
And which type do you suspect are better for engaging in good listening and true understanding?
Well, open-end questions.
Yeah. I wonder how many of our questions tend to be more closed. We're looking for, and I say that I can see it myself when there's an answer I want, my questions tend to be more closed. Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, yes or no.
Yes.
Because you kind of push it along. Open-ended, though, invites a discussion. And more questions. Which isn't bad.
Investigation.
Yeah. That would be my encouragement, because I think the closed questions come easily, the ones that can be easily answered with yes or no. Open-ended questions that invite a thoughtful, more than a single word answer, those are the ones that I think are harder to ask. Maybe because we haven't thought about it before, but maybe in part because we know when we venture those questions, we know what we're also inviting in terms of time commitment and response. And emotional commitment for that matter. And I wonder if we would get better at the open-ended type questions in a genuine way, if we wouldn't improve the quality, heighten, broaden, deepen the quality of our relationships with one another too. Because it's inviting that kind of, let me know who you are, and vice versa. Who you really are. Not just who you project yourself to be. In a world that is very plastic, that is very different. To be able to share who I really am. There's a deep longing for that, by the way. I would say the second, between our willingness to invest the time in one another and our willingness to accept and to help one another with who we truly are, or where we're truly at. Those are two qualities that are very, very unusual in our world. And yet, I think they're at the heart and core of what Christian ministry has to offer to one another. That seems like a good place to close. Let's close out with prayer. Heavenly Father, you are good and gracious. We thank you for inviting us into your presence, for speaking to us through your word today, for the opportunity to speak with one another. Most of all, for the opportunity to listen to you, listen to each other. Lord, that, as we remarked today, a skill that is one that can be learned and one that we seek to and desire to grow in. Bless us in that. Bless us with hearts that truly want to hear what you and what others are saying, with a desire to share the goodness of what you shared with us with them. Lord, bless us with that skill. Bless us with the desire to keep growing in that skill. And bless our relationships as a result of exercising that skill. We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.